Welcome to another edition of the Bhandwagon podcast, and today I'm joined by none other than Jess Phillips, MP for Birmingham Yardley. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's nice to see you in a really relaxed environment.
I'm in bed, Ricky.
Oh. Let me just change the next few questions of what I'm going to address.
I'm not actually in bed, but I'm just sat on my bed. It is the only place where I can get any peace in my house.
Is that in terms of, like, obviously with the hustle and bustle of how you have to operate between your house and Parliament, is this kind of your place of sanctuary then?
Yeah, I mean, normally, actually, I find the place I feel the most sanctuary is in my constituency office.
Right.
But it's been a bit hard because people weren't able to come in, but they've been able to come back in again in the last couple of weeks. So I thought it best not to do it there, because you'd be hearing people, making complaints about their slabs or talking about their homeless application in the background, and it's not necessarily the best environment to do a podcast. But yeah, I don't know how I'm going to get back to life going back to Westminster all the time, because I just have grown like really into a homebody, and I thought that I'd really miss London. And I went down last week and the week before, and I just was desperate to come home again straight away.
Have you got you've got your pajamas, and then you got your daytime pajamas? Have you?
Yeah. The amount of pajamas I have bought online during the pandemic. I've got like best pajamas, and then like dirty, grubby, old holy pajamas. I've got more pajamas than I've ever owned in my life.
Yeah, I think we'll change the direction of this podcast very quickly. Otherwise, we're just going to talk about beds and stuff like that again. In terms of like when you've mentioned going back to your office, obviously with the pandemic in the end in sight at some point. What are the kind of current themes people are coming to you with?
It's actually less the things that people are coming to me with, that the things that they're not coming to me with, that frightens me. So in ordinary times, the biggest amount of casework that I handle falls into three categories. And I mean, aside from all of the sort of pavement politics, your bins, your paving slabs, your parks and stuff, put that to one side. The three major areas are homelessness. People being made homeless and not having secure tenancy, having arrears, is the one of the biggest areas that I normally deal with. Immigration casework is another huge issue in the constituency that I represent. And the third one is welfare benefits, usually largely disability, but also some of the challenges of universal credit. And I am not dealing with any of those three things at anywhere near the rate that I used to deal with them. It's starting to trickle back in. But homelessness, for example, there's been an evictions ban for now nearly 18 months. It will be by the time we get to the end of the evictions ban. And so I'm not seeing court papers being filed against my constituents for arrears, or people just moving, landlords just roughshodding over regulation and that sort of thing. I'm not seeing hardly any of that going on, and that is terrifying for me, because the idea that in July, when that changes, it's going to be a tsunami, I think, of homelessness in my constituency. Lots more people living in hotels and things like that. And I'm really worried about that. Immigration, because people can't really travel. I've handled one really overzealous case of an Australian bloke who they were trying to deport completely wrongly, and I think it was just that they were bored at the airport. Genuinely, like, I think that there's about 18 people who've been through the airport, and they're like, right, let's just do this, because that, like, whereas normally I am dealing with huge amounts of immigration casework and welfare benefits. there's been a massive increase in the number of people claiming universal credit in my constituency, and the sort of tribunals for disability benefits and things have had been either postponed or changed during the pandemic. But that's just another thing that just seems to be building up to a bottleneck that is going to burst the bottle at some point. But I'd say one of the biggest issues that we have faced during the pandemic, and continues to be a massive problem, is the issue around exempt accommodation.
Okay.
So exempt accommodation is essentially what we have a problem with in Birmingham and elsewhere, but it's a major problem in Birmingham, is landlords buying up properties and claiming to be providing them to vulnerable people, and offering supportive accommodation. And they are just ramping up the amount of people living in houses of multiple occupation who have varying needs of mental health disorders, substance misuse, victims of domestic abuse, care leavers, people with learning disabilities, all living in properties with almost no support while the state is paying loads of money. It's causing huge problems in our communities with antisocial behaviour. But for me, I'm really frightened about the amount of vulnerable people living in unsuitable accommodation.
I mean, it's very clear that you're probably one of the most passionate MPs that you see around. Well, obviously, I know in person, but online or in a digital space. From when you started out in politics, did you have that sense of kind of this view that everything that you were able to tackle, that you were able to achieve, and you end up in this frustration, as I can kind of come into what you're saying. So, like, how do you get that happy medium?
I mean, it is really, really hard to not want to crusade and change the world. And everybody who goes into politics, bar about, I'm going to say around 10%, do it for the right reasons. Do it because they believe, whether they believe the route is the same as the one that I believe is the accurate route, the outcome that people want is the same, that you want to change the world. So it makes you sound like Miss World, doesn't it? Like, I just want world peace.
No Trump though.
And you very, very quickly realise, as you rise up the ranks, whether that's in the council or working in commissioning or whatever, you very, very early on, I think, get a sense of the things that you can change that might work towards changing the bigger picture in the long run. And you have to sort of try and focus your attention on them. But some days, if you get a house for somebody who didn't have a house before, that can feel like world peace. Honestly, you have to take the small wins. When someone brings you in a box of chocolates because their kid got into a school that you'd fought for them because their kid had autism and it hadn't been offered an appropriate school place, sometimes that feels the same to me as when I've changed the law. It is, you have to take the pleasure in just somebody trusting you with their secrets as much as you do like making sweeping changes, because if you didn't do that, you would become disillusioned so very quickly. Because let's face it, I'm an opposition politician, and it looks I look set to be an opposition politician for quite some time, and so I have to skin the cat that I have. And there's only really one way to do that, regardless of the saying. And so I have to focus on the things that I can change. I mean, obviously I get like mad and frustrated and scream and shout, and it gets very, very tiring when you say the same thing over and over and over and over again, and then something terrible happens and everybody starts saying the thing you've been saying, and you were like that. What's the saying my mother used to say? What am I, chopped liver? It's like, I've been saying this. I mean, could you not see me? I don't know why that's saying, what am I, chopped liver? What am I, chopped liver? Like a thing you should eat. That is really frustrating, but you just have to, the people keep you going.
Yeah, I mean, you are filled in Parliament with a lot of interesting characters, so to speak. So I'll get to those bits a little bit later on. you talked about your route. What was your route and your pathway into becoming an MP?
Well, I mean, aside from the fact that I was literally born with are deeply political. So my parents were political activists. My mum, before I was born and also while she was pregnant with me, she took on a massive campaign to sue the drug company ICI because they'd given my nan a drug that had essentially blinded her. And so, I was raised by a woman who at the age of 24 and had 2 children in a house in Bearwood had basically taken on the country's biggest drug company and won. And so, when you're brought up in that environment by people who tell you all the time that you can change the world if you try, if you bother to turn up and organise, that is the initial route that it took for me to believe that, to essentially have, I was about to say the confidence, but the real answer is the arrogance to think that you could step up. But really, the thing that made me want to get involved in proper formalised politics and having power to change things was the time I spent working in the voluntary sector, either in Birmingham with asylum seekers and young offenders, and then for years working in the Black Country, working at Women's Aid, where I just saw how terrible decisions could be made by governments around welfare or housing or funding that would literally damn a voiceless people. And I just got really, really cross. And I thought, I'm going to have to just keep on climbing up the ladder until somebody gives me a suitable amount of power to do something about this. So it really all comes from, and people often ask me, like, who is your political inspiration? As if, like, I don't know, like I had pictures of 1970s politicians on my wall. I didn't.
Who did you have?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just a normal human being. I had Kurt Cobain, but like I did not, and he has some questionable attitudes towards women. But everybody's so problematic now, aren't they?
I think. It's not very good. It's not really a good idea to tell who your heroes are, or to me.
I know, because they'll like
get cancelled.
All turn out to be total wrong-uns. Everybody turns out to be a total wrong-un in the end. There's literally no way of escaping it seems. But the people who genuinely inspired me were the people who, I worked for ages with like women refugees who'd come from Sierra Leone at the time of the civil war there and in Rwanda. And these women were like, people think it's really depressing. They were a proper laugh most of the time. And the women in refuge were just like, they were so delightfully cynical and entertaining, as well as people think it's like a really sad story. And it's the same working in substance misuse and things like that. The characters you meet along the way are really, really, really inspiring. And so it's always just those people, some of whom definitely would get cancelled if they were on a public stage.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think even now, looking back on some of my substance misuse career, I always have these kind of certain characters, and I have those characters in my head to say, right, what would this person do in this scenario? Because they're just completely different, like wired differently in that way of thought, and
totally.
The expertise is amazing.
Oh, well, the thing is, the expertise amongst the women in refuge, they would never have made the mistakes that the government made around domestic abuse. They would never have made those mistakes because they weren't born yesterday. And we don't recognise enough how much service users in whatever service are the absolute experts. It's like if you're a patient and you have a rare disease, you probably know more about it than 99% of GPs. And yet we all live within this hierarchy of people whose opinions matter. And that is, I find that absolutely maddening. And so actually, whenever I make decisions, I've got like 4 or 5 service users in my head. And I think, well, how would this help this person? Would this help? Or am I just saying it because it's politically expedient? And I do that all the time. And don't get me wrong, I say some things that are just politically expedient. Like all politicians do. Let's just be honest about that. Sometimes I say things because it's the politically expedient thing to say.
Um, kind of on the same kind of theme of that. Every time when I've seen you on TV, for example, you know the domestic violence is obviously something that's very core to you. Jess Phillips, domestic violence, it almost goes like beans on toast. Why, to the person that's on, you know, just an average person who's not interested in politics, is domestic violence bill so hard to? How was the journey of it? And I don't even know where it's at this point.
It's just finished.
That's why. So I was like, why was that such a hard thing that makes common sense to 99% of the population in this country through Parliament?
The reason it was hard was because it was nobody's political priority. It was nobody's. You've got to remember that it started in a time of, well, actually a time before, but it lived most of its life in a time of Brexit, and every single opportunity for the domestic abuse bill to fall, it would fall, because it was never, the lives of women are never anybody's actual political priority. That's not fair to say of individuals. So, you know, I don't think anyone could make that charge against me, against Harriet Harman, even against Theresa May. You would find it hard to make that argument against individuals, but as a political class, as a parliament, as an institution, the lives of women don't matter. And so you hear this thing all the time, and now that I'm saying it to you, you're going to hear it all the time, and it will start to really irritate you.
Is this the latest buzzword?
Well, it's not even the latest thing. It's just a thing that people say in politics, and it's just a platitude, and it's a totally meaningless one. Is that the first line of defence of any government is the safety and security of its people. Now, people say that all the time, and they only ever say it in terms of borders and armed forces, essentially men in uniform, whether that's police, soldiers, or border guards. That's the first line of defence of any government, is the safety and security of its people. Now, the single biggest crime type in the United Kingdom is domestic abuse. It accounts for a quarter of all call-outs to the police, more than any other crime type, and no one ever, when they say the first line of any government is, the first responsibility is the safety and security of its people, no one ever closes their eyes when they say that statement, whether it's Churchill or Boris Johnson, and thinks that the safety and security of women in their homes, on the streets and in their workplaces is the thing that they're talking about. They just don't see it. And that is why the domestic abuse bill was so hard to get through, because if it had been a terrorism bill, it would have taken 3 months. If you were to look at the number of people who die at the hands of terrorists in our country, not, horrendous. My own friend was killed by a terrorist. I'm not underplaying how important that is. But politically, it is so much more important, because it brings with it political expediency. It brings with it the ability to create division and fear, which is a way that people can control. And it brings with it a sense of jingoism in a way that fighting for the nation's women doesn't. And that is just a fundamental fact, is that politics will never prioritise the lives of women, because women just don't have as much political power.
I mean, it's really powerful in some of what you've just said there. I've got many different kind of angles that I'm trying to go through, but you would have thought that over the last 12 months, there was a growing number of evidence, even more, that there was domestic violence was not just, well, perpetrators had more space to operate, and domestic violence victims, that they would have used that and actually seen it. So, right, actually, it's moved up that political agenda a little bit more where it used
to. It definitely has moved up the political agenda. And the killing of Sarah Everard absolutely enabled it to move up the political agenda, but it will fall down without effort. Now, one thing I would say about the pandemic is that it gave everybody a universal experience, and universality in politics is you can't buy it. Yeah. Like there's very few things that people experience universally, even like making education good, like, you know, whether the vast majority of people have children, actually education policy doesn't matter to great swathes of the country, even though it is quite a populous policy area. And you think women, we are half the people, more than half. You'd think that our stuff would be quite populous. But actually, universal experiences are quite rare. It's why people love the NHS, because it's a universal service. And we can all talk about the NHS because pretty much everybody uses it. And during lockdown, everybody had the universal experience of being locked in their homes and being a bit frightened. And, you know, for somebody who sticks up for victims of domestic violence, it was game changing, because for the first time ever, people recognised their privilege, and they were saying things like, you know, it's really hard and I miss my family, but at least when I'm at home, no one's beating me up. At least I'm safe. People started to recognise what it must be like to be terrified in your own home. And that, I think, is something that will last for a long time. But it's going to take a huge amount of work for people like me to keep the foot on the pedal of keeping it on the political agenda, because it will just fall away, like Black Lives Matter. You know, it was a huge thing in the summer that, you know, then the people who are involved in these sorts of equality struggles, it takes a huge amount of work to keep them up on the agenda. But every time these things happen, I'm going to be hopeful about it. You bring a few more million people in the country with you. And actually, the more people in the country care about something, the more politicians will care about it. They're fundamentally trying to keep their jobs. And so, you know, I will feel hopeful about what the pandemic has done to people's experiences of domestic abuse, and their feelings about it have definitely improved.
So in putting it in a direct kind of outcome, the bill goes through, what impact would you like to see happen? What would be the result of that?
Well, the bill, I mean, I suppose the bill has huge amounts of good things in it, but the impact I don't want it to have is that people think, oh, job done. Because there's loads of stuff that isn't in it that should be. But the impact, the initial impact that I think that it will have is for at least over the next couple of years, we will see an increase in the number of refuge bed spaces and routes to escape for people. And local councils will have to now, by law, have to care about domestic abuse in a way that they might not have bothered before. Some are really good. Obviously, I was on Birmingham City Council for many years, and you know that I have no doubt that they care about this and want to provide services even when they're cut to the bone. That they care about it. But that, you know, I remember the example being that in Theresa May's constituency, when Theresa May was the Prime Minister who was pushing for the domestic abuse bill, in her constituency, which is covered by Windsor Council, they weren't providing a single refuge bed space. And it's just like, yeah, sort your own house out, Theresa, because my council provides it. There will be places that now have to think about it that didn't have to think about it before in policy terms, and that can only be a good thing. But, you know, we're so far off. I mean, domestic abuse bill doesn't have anything about sexual violence, street harassment, stalking really in it. And so now I just sort of chalk that one up as a win and go on to the next 4-year battle about the next bill that I'm going to make them have.
Did you find it more frustrating? I know this is probably an unfair angle on Theresa May, but being a woman and not really pushing the cause?
Well, no, because she did, to be fair to her, she did push the cause. It was her bill. She started it. She gets far more praise than she deserves in some regards for just starting it. What I would say about Theresa May is that she was so hamstrung as the Prime Minister. When she was the Prime Minister, she managed to push quite a lot forward while she was the Home Secretary, incidentally. But she also cut the police to the bone, which obviously isn't a great idea. But she was so hamstrung by Brexit and trying to win battles within her own party that she didn't do any of her domestic agenda any justice while she was the Prime Minister. And she just was a bit weak about, like, she would say things like, oh, well, this should happen. And it's like, well, I don't know if you know this, but you're the Prime Minister. So make it happen. Like, I feel similarly about Boris Johnson, actually. They don't seem to know what to do with the power when they have it. They get like, they still talk about things as if they're an idea rather than something that they can make happen. And I find that, like, as somebody who may never hold political power and government office as an opposition MP, I just, if I had the power that Theresa May had, I can think of 100 things I'd have done in the 100 days that she'd been there.
It was one of my kind of later questions, but I kind of ask it now. What would you do in your?
Oh gosh, what would I do? Well, the first thing I would do, which they've failed to do this week with the Queen's speech, and I think it's a bit rich getting like a 95-year-old woman to forget about her own people, that I would sort out social care. I would sort out the enormous care crisis in our country that means basically an army of women, often migrant women, are underpaid to look after almost all of us eventually, and the access to dignified healthcare for adults with disabilities and even children with disabilities, but adults with disabilities and older people. It's just the total missing link. And politicians, one thing I would do if I was in charge is I'd be much more courageous. I think that you'd be surprised how little courage there is in the House of Commons. So little. It's gonna cost money to do that, to have whether it's free
social care portfolio is just huge.
Yeah,
anyway, yeah,
it's just so massive.
Yeah.
So that's, I think that would be my first most pressing concern. But what I would do around domestic abuse is that I would make it a statutory function of any council, because currently statutory functions of local authorities are adult and children's social care and bins. Now we've got refuge accommodation into that statutory, which we fought for. But, I would like women to matter as much as bins. I don't need us to surpass them. One day women will matter as much as policy about cars, and then we'll know that we've truly made it. Once again, I don't wish to surpass cars with political power. I just would like an equality with them, because you will hear many more politicians standing in their local councils, in their regional mayoralties, and in Parliament and the Lords and wherever in Whitehall, talking about cars, than you will hear them talking about women. And so I would make legislation. I would start a proper violence against women and girls bill that properly looked at the root and branch problems of violence against women and girls. I'd also equalise men's paternity to be the same as women's maternity, and that you didn't have to share it, that everybody got the same, because you would solve a childcare crisis.
You'd sort out an age-old battle.
You'd sort out an age-old battle, because actually we decide who's going to look after the children, not based on the fact that women are better with children. I mean, I'm absolutely appalling compared to my husband, who loves playing games. I am like that. Turn the iPad on. The fact of the matter is that my husband got paid more than me when my children were little, so it made much more sense for me to come out of work. Yeah. And if it's based only on that, women will always lose out, and we will always think that caring roles in our society are for women, and that's just absolute rubbish. And also, if you both got like a year off with 90% full pay at the first 6 weeks and then pay, but if you both got that, you've got basically almost 3 years of free childcare, and then you get your free childcare place.
Yeah, I think we experienced that, especially in the last year, and because it is strangely enough, I was having this conversation with one of my friends last night. His childcare costs are higher than his own mortgage.
Oh, totally. Totally. I had 2 kids in childcare at one time, and it was like £900 a month. And at the time, my mortgage was £500.
But but yeah, the paternity leave is always well, for me personally, I I was kind of happy I had like for the first 2 weeks, because I was going to work for a break, because I just couldn't. I think
It's the
what
hardest
happens.
thing in the world.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think all the pregnancy books and everything that you hear, where you go to all the classes, is always telling you of like about the pregnancy and how the baby's going to be and blah blah. It never tells you anything after. I remember
No one tells you anything.
the first thing I did, I saw my mom. She had a smile, and the other thing was, I had to go onto YouTube and find out how to do a nappy, and that was like a godsend for like YouTube. Yeah, I didn't have no. I spoke to both my mother-in-law and my mom, and they go like, we don't bloody know. It's been about 30 odd years since we did that. And then I was like, oh, that's a good point actually.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, no one prepares you. And like you say, I went back to work for a rest.
Yeah,
That's why I went to work. I literally went to work for a rest, because it's so hard. It's the hardest job in the world. And I just think that men should be left to look after their children on their own in the first year of their life, because otherwise men end up being painted as being the people who are not responsible for their bloody children. And it is absolutely, it's not fair on men. It's not fair on women. It messes up our economy. It's just a nightmare. And we have to procreate. We need to keep populating the earth, or maybe slightly less than we have. That it seems like a no-brainer to me. But there we go.
You've obviously got this kind of this huge kind of workload, and you can just see in terms of your thinking space of where you're kind of operating. I know you've kind of moved into, like, not moved into, you've written Truth to Power, where you had seven different seven rules in there. And I always remember one. I remember I'll be honest, I read it a fair while ago, but it was about, you had different people in different chapters who represented their stories to reflect on that. Which you've had some time to think about it, and I will give you your new book a big plug, which is going to be everything you really need to know about politics and life as an MP, coming out 22nd of July 2021. So I'll put the link for your pre-order on my description. Looking back from when you wrote those 7 rules, do you think they still apply now?
Oh, absolutely. More so, if anything, because things are getting really, really bullshitty. Really badly. Yeah, that was the title. Things are getting worse, actually, with regard to people who hold power crystallizing their power and removing the opportunities for ordinary citizens to fight against it, whether that's through our court system changing, or in the last couple of weeks the talk about disenfranchising people needing to have ID to vote, and all sorts of, loads of my constituents don't have a passport because they've never left the country.
There's no. I was listening to Preston last night. He actually was saying about there's no evidence base of how that actually affects.
Fraud.
Yeah, in the UK.
6 cases since 2015. Do you know how many cases of rape there've been? They're not making a bill about rape, are they? Well, I mean, absolutely crackers. Yeah, absolutely crackers. But they're just doing it to disenfranchise people. They're not even trying to hide it. And so while really bullshitty things are happening, and they are trying to marginalise ordinary citizens' power, the sort of messages in that book about how we have to organise to fight against that are becoming even more vital, in my view. But yeah, no, there's none that I think that I would tell people to do differently.
Would you add to it? I know that
God, yeah, all the time.
Yeah, because you had. I remember in one of your interviews around the time when you were releasing it, you said you initially had 5, and then you went up to 7, and then you put all these kind of ones together.
There's loads of people that you meet all the time, and you just think, God, you're amazing, and you're fighting to change the world. And actually, one of the things I didn't really cover in the book, apart from, I suppose, about those who stood up against Harvey Weinstein, was, and that was more about him being powerful rather than the actual incidences. I didn't, because I suppose not wanting to be pigeonholed, and also speaking to different audiences, I didn't write much about those who are the campaigners who've changed the world around domestic abuse. And you know, I meet every day people who's, I mean, just literally the call that I had before I came onto this call was with a man called Nick Gazzard, whose daughter Holly was murdered at the age of 20 by a previous boyfriend. And all of these people turn that misery into activism. And he's doing amazing things. And so, you know, and like I say, I meet people, and during the pandemic, the amount of people who are ordinarily maligned for one reason or another, whether it's particular communities or who just rolled up their sleeves and just got on with helping people and trying to make things better, is, you know, is quite phenomenal. The amount of amazing and inspirational examples you could come out of in the pandemic about people who just didn't give up fighting, and also all those people fighting now for their families who died during the pandemic. There's going to be a huge amount of activism that comes out of that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there is quite a lot of, you know, that you can experience through friends and family and extended friends and family that you know about. There's a lot of anger, you know, waiting. You could just feel like there's just a boiling point coming through. And interestingly, about kind of the election, the new kind of election legislation they're trying to build in, where they can call a general election at any point a lot sooner than the Prime Minister can, and then kick the inquiry a little bit further down the line. So your new book then, which was around about everything you need to know about politics, why did you feel that you needed to write that book? Was there a gap in what people's knowledge was?
Yeah, there was a massive gap in the reality versus what you watch on either. What gets reported, and there's a whole chapter in the book about the difference between, like, you know, the reality of what gets reported and the reality of what actually happens, and how the media works with politics. You know, I'm not here slacking off the media. Politics is just as much, politics and the political class are just as much a cog in that machine, and it plays to the strengths of both parties. But it's not necessarily realistic. My husband is not a member of a political party. He's a deeply political man, but not, you know, he often says to me, it's not so much that I vote for Labour, I just don't vote for anybody else. That he, you know, when I became a member of Parliament, he said to me, you know, people have absolutely no idea what you do all day. Like, I had no idea to the extent of the work, and it's not even like there's loads of work, but even like why things are difficult. So when you're saying, yeah, you know, the average people in the public, they wouldn't understand why the domestic abuse bill took 4 years. There is a huge deficit in, it's not understanding, as it's not the fault of the people, in what gets presented, and it's not just by journalism. It's also like whenever you see the job that I do presented in drama or in film, just you would believe that the place is full of amazing orators who make speeches that change everybody's mind every day, and that debates are decided because someone made a rousing speech. What a load of bollocks. Literally, when you turn up for a debate, right, and you're going to speak in it, everybody knows. I could tell you the vote tally before I'd even open my mouth. Everybody knows how they're going to vote. Nobody ever changes their mind. It is just the theatre that you see is totally mythical. And the vast majority of good things that happen in politics happen in the rooms where you can't see it happening. There's private conversations, their relationship building, their campaigning with people in church halls, not in Westminster. And I just don't think that people actually understand not just the technical. I mean, I started writing about some of the technical things, and I got bored. I had to at the end just do a glossary of terms, because I'm like that. I am bored of writing about what a bill committee is. So it's not like that. It's not like a political textbook, although it does have some of that information in it. But it's about the life in the place and what it actually means to be a member of parliament, and how it actually influences and doesn't influence.
The biggest thing I ever learned when I went to Whitehall was I was a young lad, very dashing.
Rakish.
Yeah, that was it. When we went into Whitehall, and I can't remember the building's name, and I remember seeing a few politicians, and I was like,
which department was it? Department of Health?
No, it is the building which is opposite Big Ben. It was, I don't know what it was called. It had like a capsule as you come in as a scanner.
It might be the Home Office, or
could be. I remember going in there.
Caxton House.
I got invited, and the person who took me in, and he was walking alongside me, and I just bumped him, and my old Handsworth roots came out. I was like, Harry, there's going to be a fight here. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, that geezer there and that geezer there, they hate each other, and like they're about to square up and talk to each other. And I was like, he was like,
in Whitehall.
Yeah. So he goes, Ranj, he goes, no, you're wrong. And I said, what do you mean? And I turned and I watched them, and they shook hands and they sat down and they had lunch together. And I was like, this is fraud.
Yeah. Totally.
On question time, they're slagging each other off. And hang on, there's got other Tory and Labour people sitting around the same table, and there's a whole
thing I write in my book about this, about how I had some students come in and follow me for the day, and they came into the chamber, and me and a member of parliament are proper going at each other, and then I go and meet them in the lobby afterwards, and he comes up to me and he's like, oh, Jess, how are the kids? How did Harry get on?
I could have, and that, so you can understand what
total, that's what I'm saying, it's total story,
but it was proper truth, where I was like, Duncan Smith, and I was like,
oh yeah, it's total. It's not necessarily that it's fake. It's just different.
Yeah.
Your job is different at different points. Now, if I wasn't friends with people with power, I wouldn't be able to get anything that I want. And one of the ways I get what I want is slagging them off. Another way I get what I want is by being friends with them. It's all ultimately fake, because when I say I'm friends with them, I wouldn't like invite them to my house.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
None of them have ever been round for a pint or anything.
But that betrayal, that from what I've seen, and I just realised, thinking about it right now, it's like how the media portray and understanding human relationships. Of course, you've got to get to people. Of course, you've got to have dialogue.
Where everybody works, right? The thing is also people put politics and politicians into a different category. Like everybody who works for, like, let's say you work for a big company that has more than 250 people, or even one that just has 20. Some people who work there are twats. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you don't like them, but at work it would be really unprofessional to not like them really publicly, and you'd get in trouble if it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Like, I really don't like some of my colleagues in my own party, but I don't feel the need to point it out constantly, because I've got a job to get on with.
Yeah. Just going to your own party. The last week or so has been I think this is the time where you can put the blanket over your head now. Where do you feel
like the scream?
Yeah, where do you think this goes? Because I feel a little bit like your husband at this point, where just I vote for him just because I can vote for him, but I'm at that point where I just don't feel like even voting. I just don't.
No, well, don't do that.
But, no, this is the truth about it, and I come from a political.
No, that is
my bit, and
the truth,
because there isn't anybody who kind of represents what's going on. So, what are the next steps for the Labour Party?
Oh, it's got to buck up its ideas, hasn't it? That's the top and bottom of it. It's got to look to the future and provide hope. Because what you say is, you're just voting for voting's sake is not good enough, and people just won't do it. And it's always like the Labour Party has always had a tougher gig. It's a much easier argument to defend the status quo. To literally, I think people also forget this, that the Conservatives, to us, it's just like the name of they literally seek to conserve power where it is. It is to conserve things as they are. And I think that even though it's in their name, that gets lost quite a lot. And so the Labour Party has always had a tougher gig in trying to push forward for progress. But it's become too timid, in my view, doing that. And we need to just be like painfully hopeful about where people live and painfully hopeful about the future. And just inspire people, actually, because it's very hard when you're in opposition, is the realities, because my job is to moan.
Yeah.
It's my job to moan about what's happening. But you know what? It's really tedious for people to just listen to people moaning about how everything's bad all the time. It's a bit like being Linus in Snoopy, like just like dragging around a blanket, being like, "Oh, everything's so bad." Like, actually, you want to be Charlie Brown, and you want to be like, we're going to go out and we're going to make this better. And that is, I think, because Boris Johnson is a total fraudster, but he's a cheerful one.
But okay, here's my point on this. The last 12 months have demonstrated stupidity to an unbelievable level, right? I've had people who are my friends who are like, who I will say have done a 360 and witnessed exactly some of these decisions and some of the things that have happened, and yet they still want. There was one poll where where NHS staff or care staff actually were still voting, and I gave up at that point.
You shouldn't give up, but I can see why.
I was like, I just don't understand what it's going to take.
Yeah, the thing is what it's going to take is a better alternative.
Yeah,
that's all. It's not that those people think that what has happened is acceptable or that things are fine. They don't. The Labour Party has to present a better alternative, and actually, it's providing an alternative at the moment, but people don't believe that would necessarily be better, and so it's a sort of better the devil you know situation. But you don't be disheartened by the people thinking that, because that way lies madness. Some people are wrong, just fundamentally, but the vast majority are not, and blame the political class and for that. Totally. Like, I will try and say, actually, some of this is on you sometimes, but actually, we've not been a good enough alternative. We don't deserve. I think John Smith, who the anniversary of his death was this week, actually, who became the leader of the Labour Party before Tony Blair, but he died suddenly, and so that's why Tony Blair took over. He said, all I ask is for the privilege to serve, is that you trust us enough to serve. And that is what the Labour Party has got to do. It's got to believe that it has to ask to serve. We don't deserve it.
Yeah.
It's not something that we deserve just because we're righter than we're better and nicer, which, let's face it, we are better and nicer. I have no doubt about that. But that's not enough. We've got to earn the right to serve and govern. And we haven't yet earned it. So we better crack on with that.
Yeah, I've tried to be kind of objective as as I can, because I was like, I don't find a party for me at the moment. And and even in defense, I can't believe I'm saying this. In defense of the Tories, there was, you're uncharted territory. But I just thought that it was an opportunity where politically, with that tribalism didn't need to be there, where you're making a healthcare matter into a political issue. I just expected better from politicians across the house in order to kind of unite and do that.
You're right to have expected better. It's sort of uncharted though, isn't it? Like who knows how to exist in this world? Who knows what would, whether you over politicize it, under politicize it. It's a very fine balance, and I think that it would have been hard for any opposition politicians, to be honest. But you're absolutely right. We all whether it's from the Labour Party, from the government's response to the pandemic, to our hopes that the people would think differently, we all just deserve better. That's the fundamental. We deserve better, but people have got to expect better, and people have forgotten how to expect things to get better. We've forgotten that things used to progress, and actually we've just got used to decline. We've got used to the fact that things are shittier and harder, and it's harder for us to get our kids into school. We've all just got used to the fact that we probably can't get a GP appointment. When I was pregnant with my son, you know, I could ring up and have an appointment that day. But now I go, oh, well, I'm not feeling very well, so probably best if, you know, I'll ring, I'll be able to get an appointment next week. And I don't think, hang on a minute, that's a terrible decline. I just got used to it. And so we've got to get the country to expect better before we can say, oh, we're the better ones.
Yeah, I get that. And I think at the first part of my son actually broke his arm within the second day of lockdown when this all lockdown one, and we were taking him to a hospital, and we were like, oh my God, this is the last place where you want it.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was it was the first time where you call the doctors and you were able to get like on
the phone,
a Zoom one. I was like, hey, this is weird, because normally it's 2 weeks that you to go on. Talking about this digital space, you know, you're clearly kind of very out there with your opinion. You make a lot of headlines, and you do
it's a burden.
You do get yourself into a bit of hot water when you do say some stuff.
Yeah.
Do you in your book, do you cover the kind of the online pressures that an MP sort of faces?
Yes, I cover some of it, and I did in the first book I wrote about how, like, the horrible trolling specifically of women. But yeah, I do cover the anxiety that, and it's not even the incidences, it's the relentlessness. It's relentless. It is relentless, and it will chip away at your confidence to speak. Because sometimes you just think, I can't be asked with it today, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to speak. And that's the point of it. That's the whole point, is that people trying to stop you from speaking. But yeah, I do cover it in the book, The Relentless Life of a Politician Online.
So, you know, you've talked about the role of women. Obviously, I'm not trying to give anything away from the book. What was the site? If you go on your profile and you see your timeline, it is horrific. It's genuine.
It's horrific.
And I know even putting this out when I do put it out.
Oh, you expect terrible shit.
So
yeah.
How do you, what is a kind of a practical guide for you to try and deal with that? Because you're dealing with emotive subjects, even with other colleagues within your own party, you have fractious relationships, so to speak. So how do you deal with that?
Practically, I don't see a lot of it anymore. I have really, really good filters and things. So most of it doesn't, still some of it breaches. So it's sort of happening. And actually the way I know that people are saying horrible things about me is I'll be trending on Twitter, and I have no idea why, 9 times out of 10. But it's usually hate. Or people start to defend you, and I follow the people who are defending me. So I see their tweets and I think, oh, I didn't know people were slagging me off. And so that protects me just on a day-to-day basis. Your mental health, it stops it getting to you. The thing that I find really troubling is people like yourself, like you said, when you put this out, you're going to get more so than you will ever get from anyone else. It will be it will be bad. And people say to me, like, there's a bakery opened in King's Heath near where I live, and I put that I'd been to the bakery, and they put that, thanks very much, Jess Phillips, for coming. And I went in the next day and they were like, oh, how do you live your life? And I hadn't seen any of it, and they were like, God, we just got horrendous. Like, even on Instagram it was like, God, it's really bad for you. And so then people stop asking me to do things like that for them, and that is, I'm afraid to say, just classic violence against women and girls. The initial tactic to control somebody is to isolate them from people, is to isolate the people around them from being able to be a resource for them, by making those people scared or weary. And so that frightens me much more, is that people go, oh, should we have Jess come and talk about this? And then they're like, oh, it's not worth it. Like a knitting circle in Yardley Library once put that I was coming, that like 6 old ladies doing knitting for the community, and they got horribly trolled. And it's like, so now do the schools in my constituency, do the community groups in my constituency just think, oh gosh, just not sure it's worth having her along because of the online shit they'll get. And that pisses me off, not because of the deficit to me. I mean, it's easy. My life is easier when I don't have to go to everything. But I hate that people with less resource and resilience than myself have to deal with the hatred that I get. That, and my children, that it harms me when it harms my children, who don't really have the same freedoms as other people's teenagers. They don't really have a life online because of it. And maybe, again, that makes my life considerably easier and less fraught. But it's not fair that their liberty is limited. And so practically, the only thing I could do would be to be silent, more, compliant, but I'm just not willing. I just have to take it. And I wish that, unlike all the stuff that women just have to take, or people of colour just have to take to carry on living, like just have to tolerate loads of shit. I don't know what the alternative is.
Do you ever think about it's actually having too much of an effect and to walk away from it? Or
no, because it would kill me to walk away. Like, that's a death. To give in to such bullying. But also, I'm much more frightened of people being left in abusive situations without people being able to speak up for them. I'm more frightened of fascism that makes people like me stop than I am of keeping going. You don't eliminate the threat by walking away. I wouldn't be any safer, fundamentally, because my society would be less safer. The society that we all have to live in, if everybody just gives up and doesn't try and fight for the fact that everybody should be able to vote regardless of whether they own a passport, or that women deserve to have a voice, or that black people shouldn't have their necks lent on by the police. If we give up fighting for that better thing, more black people will have their necks lent on by the police, more women will be silenced and abused, fewer people will go out and vote, and the same powerful people, and essentially you end up living with fascism, and I don't want that. That's more scary. I'm not safer in that environment. I might individually be at less risk, but I'm not safer.
Do you think that there is a kind of, I'm not saying you've done anything wrong in that way, but like a road for redemption of kind of like turning it around from
what, to stop the abuse against me?
Yeah, because if you look at no,
absolutely not. I'm big enough to know that it's nothing to do with me anymore. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. I could become Katie Hopkins and and spout far right bullshit, and still the people who spout far right bullshit at me would carry on spouting it. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. I can't change the fact that I'm a woman. I can't change it. And that I speak up for women. I literally fundamentally, and that's the thing about identity politics, is that people don't understand. There's nothing you can do, Ricky, about being Asian. There's nothing I could. I mean, you can try. You can I don't know. You can't do anything about it. You can't. And they fundamentally hate that. The fundamentals. So I can't change that I'm a woman. So I mean, it just. There's nothing we can do about it, and so there is no redemption from my womanhood. There's no redemption from your Asianness. There's no redemption from people's gayness. There is. We're just stuck with it. So I'm just stuck with it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of like thinking in what you said of like, I just don't think a lot of people that I know, and including myself, would would be able to kind of handle that. I just don't know how you
You'd be
have that
surprised how much you can
mental
tolerate
resilience.
when it builds up. It's like people think that they wouldn't be able to live with an abusive person, and because that's because you don't realise that it doesn't go from 0 to 60 overnight. You're trained to tolerate it over a long period of time. So I've just got, and also there's just so much positive and brilliant about my life since I became a politician. So many doors open. Like, nobody would have cared whether I'd written a book or not, or asked me to write a book. Like, no, my kids get to experience things that I couldn't imagine when I was a kid growing up in Birmingham. Just that there is so much positive. I am essentially freer than I've ever been in any other job. I make my job what it is, and it's up to me to decide what I want to do. And sometimes that ends me in trouble, but that's all. It's all on me. I'm not wearing somebody else's shit. It's all on me, and that is a freedom I would struggle to give up now. I would struggle to go back to being employed or. So there's a huge amount of freedom, and unlike some of my Conservative colleagues who often say, "Oh, it's a calling," and I had to slash my wages to become a member of Parliament. It's a pretty well paid job. I'm freer in lots and lots of regards in a way than it has made my life and the life of my children better, much more than it has made it hard.
So coming to the kind of final segment of this, it is called the Bhandwagon, and it is a play on my surname. And there is an opportunity for you to. Is there a bandwagon that you want to jump on, or you got particular feelings about?
People. One of the things, funnily enough, that people accuse me of is, "Oh, she's jumping on this bandwagon all the time." That is one of the main sort of slurs that you get.
Well, you got a chance now.
Yeah, people are like, "Oh, she's jumping on the rape bandwagon." I'm like, it's a really shitty bandwagon. Why would anybody want to jump on this? Yeah. Oh, the women's bandwagon. It's just like, try being a woman. It's rubbish. But what bandwagon? I mean, there's so many things that I think, oh gosh, I need to get on to knowing more about all of these things, like anything to do with tech. Maybe I need to get a podcast. Like, this a bandwagon I should jump on.
I mean, you'll get a lot of attention, which is
good. Exactly.
You may spare up some of your time from when doing some of your books.
Yeah,
I would encourage it.
Yeah, so maybe that's a bandwagon I need to jump on. Loads of politicians, they have some really quite lucrative bandwagons, and their friends all seem to be getting contracts from their power. So maybe my friends who are builders and midwives, maybe they'd like to jump on that particular bandwagon of I'll just start giving out, the local landlord of my pub, a massive £25 million PPE contract. That seems like a pretty good bandwagon to be on, which alas, I seem to have not managed to jump on as it passed me by. So yeah, there's quite a lot of but the podcast bandwagon, that's the one I'm going to jump on.
You should definitely do it, and if ever you need me to jump on that, you just let me know. Okay, all right, okay, that's fair enough. So kind of the last question, really, in terms of what's the next 6 to 12 months going to look like for you?
Oh God, I mean, a week is a long time in politics, I believe, is the saying. I think that the next 6 to 12 months is going to look like me putting my shoulder very, very, very much to the wheel of trying to get the Labour Party to work as a team in a time where it got taken over when we couldn't be together and we haven't been in the same room as each other, trying to help basically be a foot soldier in trying to push the Labour Party to be a better alternative, but also to not let the government off the hook of giving women one bill in a generation. So I'll be seeking and working up loads more law changes for violence against women and girls, as always. And no doubt I'll write another book because and start a podcast. And I was about to say, I'd like, I don't know, have more children, but that's definitely not going to happen. Definitely never again. Maybe I'll give some attention to the ones I've got.
And yours,
so that would be nice. He doesn't need attention. He's too self-sufficient to need my attention. He's sort of delighted that, you know, when I think he's found the last year really hard because when we were first together, he worked on a night shift, 4 nights on, 4 nights off, so we never spent more than 4 nights together. And then obviously he gave up night shifts when I went to Parliament, where I'm there for 3 nights, back here for 4 nights. And I think being together constantly for a solid year, we used to struggle with a bank holiday weekend.
Okay, yeah. So the last year must have been like
it's just like, you know,
prison.
We have literally nothing to say to each other anymore. It's like we've covered every topic. We're now having to start new hobbies to find new conversation points.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. I'll try and unpick that myself.
I love my husband more than anyone on earth, but when you can't go out and do anything, it's literally like, what are we going to watch on television tonight?
Yeah. Well, you did your house refurb as well, didn't you?
I did do that. Well, that's so we had something to talk about.
Yeah.
That was like endless decisions about the dimensions of shower trays. That kept us going for a solid week. That one decision, light fascias.
Yeah.
I mean, it gave us absolutely loads to talk about. That's what I think people do. That's what I think makes marriage work, is that you get married, get a new job, have a baby, do up the house, move house, have a baby, get a new job. It's like you have to keep having interesting things happening in your life.
It's like
to discuss.
That's like a crap version of the circle of life, isn't it? The line.
Yeah. Maybe I'll write a book about how to have a happy marriage, because I have one of the happiest marriages. And that's because we don't expect to have that much in common. My friend Helen once said, "Oh, what do you have in common?" And the thing we came up with is that we both like noodles.
Yeah. Okay. Noodles. I'll leave it at that. Jess, I really thank you for taking the time out to join me on here and have a good conversation. So whenever you do any of your books or when you launch a podcast, let me know, and I'll give it a good plug in that. But thanks for today.
No probs. Lovely to see you.
See you later.
Ta-da.